the foot? Well, look at my graph. No. Look at that graph.
Are we looking at Arz's cat now?
Yes. Sorry, I didn't hear a damn thing you said.
All right.
And because I was a gazillionaire and I like building so much, I cut that price for free.
The species is dying, the birth rate is plummeting, women are chopped. But yeah, you know what? Get a fucking cat.
I know even more about grass.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to Touch Grass. I am your intrepid host, Theo Snodgrass, comedian and podcaster out of Las Vegas, Nevada. Wherever you may be, thank you for making me a part of your day. I have a very special guest today, fellas. I have a very special guest today. With me today is Zarina Macha, the Rational Female on YouTube. Make sure to go ahead and follow her stuff. I have linked her socials in the description. Go ahead and give her a follow. Zarina, how are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, dude, I'm very excited. So I had a couple of your videos come across my timeline, and I was immediately super interested, and I knew that I wanted to talk to you. So I guess, put it briefly, a lot of your content that I have seen has been critiquing feminism. And my first thought whenever I meet a woman who's critiquing feminism, I always want to take a step back and find out how she arrived at that conclusion. Because, and from my perspective, and this is true in the United States, I don't know if this might be true to a lesser degree in the UK, but everything in the school system, everything that you're hearing from the government, everything you're hearing from the internet, from the phone, all the social conditioning is telling you feminism is awesome and you should be a feminist and girl power and go ahead queen, right? And so for you to arrive at a different conclusion, the first thing I want to hear before I get into anything else is I want to figure out how you got there.
Yeah, so my journey is quite interesting because I'm 28 years old and I'm from London. And when I was about, I'd say 14, I very much was a feminist. So I was a liberal feminist and I was very much into the whole girl power stuff. And I read Caitlin Moran, who's a very prominent liberal British feminist. I was very into Beyonce and all that stuff. And then I was part of this feminist society in my sixth form, which would be the equivalent of American high school. And I started to kind of question things, like a lot of things they talked about, like grape culture? I say it on my channel.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, please do.
Grape culture, or these kind of like things like saying we should teach boys not to hurt women. And there were things they would talk about, which I started to find very strange. And I was never like anti-men. I was never a hardcore feminist. I was always a very kind of like, you could say equality first feminist, but I really truly believed that feminism was synonymous with equality. And then one day, it actually happened when I was at university. I was 18 years old. And I was at the University of York, which I was at for a few months, and I left and went to a music academy. And when I was at York, I remember talking to one of the girls in my flat, and I was like to her, "Are you a feminist?" And she was like, "I'm a massive feminist." And she was like, "Feminism is there to cover men too." And that something in me just snapped. I've never actually discussed this publicly, but I feel like it's a good story to tell. So it was then that I really, really snapped. And like, I think before that, I was already slowly questioning feminism. And it was early 2016. I wrote this Facebook post saying I no longer identified as a feminist. And I remember after that, I just wanted to not be a feminist anymore. And then in 2017, so at this point, I was probably about 19, I started this blog and I started writing about feminism. And I was still very sympathetic towards kind of first and second wave feminism. And I was saying that modern feminism had become terrible because of things like there was the Ban Rossi campaign. There was these videos of like these girls, and they were saying things like, I want to be a princess. Oh no. And it was really ridiculous. But they were talking about how women, like girls, don't need to be rescued, and I don't want to be a princess. And there were these videos, and they were just so crass. And I just couldn't stand it. And I was like, this is really embarrassing. And I kept thinking, like, feminism used to be such a good thing, and it's just become bad. And so on my blog, there was this woman, I'm not going to say her name, but she was a very, very like key, influential, prominent figure in me. Yeah, I guess so. But she was a key influential person in making me kind of go from kind of not really a feminist anymore to like very staunchly anti-feminist. And so she would comment on a lot of my blog posts, and we would have all these discussions, all these debates. We began emailing. And over time, I started to read this book that she recommended me called The Flip Side of Feminism by Suzanne Venker. I read that in 2020. It's a very, very, very good critique of post-second wave feminism. And she talks about how things like, for example, a lot of people say feminists got women equal pay. And actually, the Equal Pay Act was passed in 1963 as part of John F. Kennedy's kind of New Frontier program. So it wasn't really a feminist victory so much as a humanitarian victory. And Venker also talks about things like how a lot of women worked during the First and Second World Wars and how women have always had opportunities. So this became very fascinating to me. And Suzanne Venker, she's very right-wing, very conservative. I'm not. I'm very much a liberal. But I really do think that feminism has really been quite detrimental to women in terms of telling women that we're victims, telling us that we're oppressed, and also taking credit for things that actually had little to do with feminism. Like, for example, birth control, that was invented by men, or other things like the equal pay I mentioned, or even the right to vote. So that there's just so much into it. So over time, after that, definitely over the last few years, I've become so staunchly anti-feminist.
Gotcha. All right. So let me just, my understanding was that let's say if I consumed all of my history of the world just from the narrative coming from the government, from the school system. Basically, women were like basically enslaved. We had them chained to the stove, and then feminism came along and freed them and upset the balance of male oppression, and all the male oppressors got put in their place. And men in the present owe some kind of debt because of this history of oppression. And then the hero in that narrative is feminists all the way coming in with these human rights victories for women, right? But that's the narrative, that feminism was bad. And even people who critique feminism will say feminism started off good and then ended up getting to kind of like a nonsense place, right? Or a counterproductive place. I think what you're saying is that even going back to the beginning, and what you've said in your content, even going back to the beginning of feminism, there are problems, right? So
Absolutely, yeah. So I think the narrative of people saying that feminism was once a good thing comes from academics. And Christina Hoff Sommers, she's a very prominent feminist who's also slightly anti-feminist. And she has a book called Who Stole Feminism, which I've read. And she basically pushes the narrative, and so does Camille Paglia, that first wave feminism was very positive and it was largely about equity. And so by like 2021, I pretty much had the idea that feminism went bad from the 1960s onwards until around 2020. It was probably 2023 when I discovered the work of Janice Fiamengo. And we did have a stream on my channel, and it was very good. Unfortunately, it's not available now. But yeah, we had a good interview, and she was talking about how feminism right from the beginning was such an awful anti-male ideology, but not just anti-male, very much rooted in this idea of female victimhood and also quite misogynistic to women. So as you said, this story that we've all been sold, that human history is an entire story of female enslavement under men, when you actually start to think about it logically, it doesn't really make any sense, because the natural role of a man is to protect and provide and be caring towards a woman, just as the natural role of a woman is to be in a loving relationship with a man and bear his children. And obviously, I'm not saying everyone has to get married and have children. I'm not saying people have to do that. I'm just saying that in terms of how humans evolve, we evolve to be in relationships with each other. So I think that male and female relationships are largely complementarian, which is actually a Christian term. But if we look at it from evolutionary perspectives, men and women evolved so that we could raise children and build societies. And that is why we have had throughout history division of roles in males and females. So, for example, the reason why men were in charge of the public sector was because women were in charge of the private domestic sector. And there's so much into it. So I guess I could go right from, say, feminism in America officially started in 1848 with the Seneca Falls Convention, and that was the first women's convention. but it kind of goes back before that to what's known as proto-feminism, because it bore out of the Age of Enlightenment, which was the rise of these kind of ideas, many which I agree with, like reason and secularism and liberalism. But then you've got things like Marxism, which I'm very against, and also socialism, and then feminism. So you have these kind of very revolutionary ideals. And a lot of it, because I think Marxism and feminism is very closely tied to Marxism as well. It's this idea of like oppression and revolution, and this idea of people needing to revolt because they are oppressed. And I think this is a very dangerous narrative, because the kind of radical left-leaning narrative of we are oppressed and we are all victims completely ignores any empathy whatsoever towards people on the other side. So if you say that, say, all white people are oppressors of black people, or all men are oppressors of women, you're actually saying all these people are like that, therefore they're all bad. And I think that's just an awful, awful viewpoint to take.
Yeah, it was because you have at some point, this is especially harmful with relationships between men and women.
Absolutely.
Because men and women have to get along, or we don't have a society. That's what I keep saying. So if you have this narrative where men are oppressors and women are the oppressed class, and they're in a constant state of conflict, and that women have like a justified resentment against men, it's like justified to. You're justified in hating your oppressors, essentially. If you look at these like identitarian Marxist movements, you're completely justified in hating your oppressors. You're completely justified in anything you do that's antagonistic to your oppressors, no matter how severe, is justified because of the history of oppression and because of the oppressive dynamic. And I think that's a recipe for sowing just resentment between men and women. That's the thing I get. I travel around the country and I talk to just like random people. Like I talked to random people. And when I was I would say when I was like a teenager, like there was like some girls who were feminists. Then I was in college, like most of the women I encountered were feminists, but like people were still kind of forming relationships. And then now when I just walk around, there's a widespread just default anti-male sentiment. When I just like walk around just like talking to people, like there's just a default setting of, not among women, of just not really liking men very much. And they're kind of just okay saying it publicly. And they think I'm an asshole if I don't agree with them. Right? Like that's what's crazy. And that's not necessarily, now to give the feminists their credit, obviously a lot of them are more, sophisticated than that. There's all sorts of like academic people spend their whole life studying feminism. There's more to it than just hating men, I'm assuming. But on the street level, the average woman who's like, absorbing the content from the culture, I think the message that they get is just I think try to encourage a lot of distrust between the sexes, and it makes getting along really difficult. And here's the thing, like we can't have a society if men and women don't get along. There's no future if men and women don't get along. There's no children without. I think that's why the West has been so successful, is because of cooperative relationships between men and women. I do.
Well,
So-
absolutely. I completely agree. And I think to dial back a bit, sorry, can I just check? Can people in the chat hear me okay? Because my mic.
Y'all, can you hear her, guys? Sound off. W's in the chat if you can hear this lady.
I just suddenly got worried.
Let's check in with the chat, by the way. That's a good chat. Vagabond is here. What's up, buddy? Vagabond, friend of the channel. Iron Oxide is here, friend of the channel. Good morning. And then, Roguish Nerd is here. What do you see? Oh, we got a question from the chat. If you want to jump in, say, what do you see as the number one misunderstanding or issue between men and women, relationships between men and women? That's great. That's a great question. It sounds like you're just a little low. So let's see if we can pump your levels up here.
I can adjust it. Is that better?
No, I'm going to pump up your, let's see. No, you're good. You're good. We'll just roll with it. Just roll with it.
So, I will say that I completely reject this idea that women were ever oppressed, because I think that, I don't believe that women have ever been oppressed. I think that what it is that men and women have had different roles all throughout human development. And there's been times when men have perhaps been abusive towards women and maybe taken advantage of women, but there have equally been times when women have been abusive to men and taken advantage of men. And if we look at mythology, so for example, in the myth of Orpheus, there is this it was I'm trying to think now, Maenads. So these group of Maenads, these women, these female creatures who were like some sort of Dionysus, I can't remember exactly, but I talked about it in another video, and they basically attack Orpheus. And we've got examples of women like, say, Rusalka, or we've got there's these women who were very vicious women in mythology. So it's not like women have always been these kind of innocent, fragile victims. Women have been very, very bad to men and to other women as well. And I don't think that women have ever been oppressed. I think women are very clever. Or even the story of Lysistrata, which is about how women, that's a very well-known myth. And
well, explain it for the audience though, because just
so Lysistrata is, I believe it's Greek, and it's basically the story of these women who, in order to stop a war, they decide to go on a sex strike, and they stop having sex with their husbands or the men in general. And then that basically means the men stop going out to war. So the men decide, oh, they're not having sex with us, so they decide to just stop the war. So that just shows to me the ultimate power of femininity and how women wield a lot of power. Like, women have sexual power, which obviously that's a very big advantage. Like, women control sex. So men, if a man wants to have sex with a woman, the woman's the one who's obviously is the one who decides that. Or there's things like, say, maternal power. We're all born of a woman, and most people love their mothers. A lot of people view their mother as like, on a pedestal. I mean, I think it's very normal for people to view their mom as like the most important person. And also, like, children as well tend to automatically, there tends to be more of a positive feeling towards the mom than the dad. And for a long time, like, fathers weren't even allowed in the rooms, in the hospital rooms when the children were being born. So, we have this big cultural bias towards females. And I think that's evidence of this view that women are inherently more innocent and more virtuous and more nurturing than men. And I think that generally is the case, or was the case. Women are more empathetic, we're more agreeable, we're more emotionally intuitive, or more cooperative. And but I do think that now, because feminism, as you said, has created such a hatred between the sexes and this horrible hatred of men. And most men I talk to in my life agree with me. Most men agree with my views. Some women do, but in my experience, women either tend to not have as strong opinion of it as me, or they tend to be pro-feminist. So that's my experience. There are women who maybe, if I say, you're a feminist, they'll say no, or they'll say, I don't know, not really. Or they will say, yes, I'm a strong feminist, but they don't tend to really think that deeply about it, which is a shame, because feminism really affects women with things like marital breakdown. And also, what most women want is to be in a loving, caring relationship with a man. Unless you're gay, that's different. But, for most heterosexual women, the desire is to be married or to be in a relationship and to have a family. And I think feminism is so antithetical to that. It runs counter to what most women want. And we've got this big death now of masculinity in men and femininity in women. And a lot of women now have become very aggressive, very masculine, very hateful and bitter. And I hear it all the time. Men are just fed up. So, and I'm not here to say, I'm not an MRA. I don't consider myself a men's rights advocate. I wouldn't say I'm a men's rights activist, but I would say that I'm just really someone who believes in general humanitarian rights for both males and females. And I believe that we really need to fix the problems between men and women that have been caused by feminism.
I love that. Okay, so I will say, as someone who hangs out in this same sector of the internet, I do get frustrated because, like, I explicitly do not consider myself to be a red pill podcaster, and I criticize the red pill extensively. I've said red pill's girl boss feminism for men. It's just like, yeah, get your bag, king, stay strong. You're a strong, independent man who don't need a woman. Like, it's just cope to me. So I understand the frustration of getting, lumped in with people you don't necessarily agree with. I feel that. And because this is it's a serious problem, and promoting cooperation is seen as for some reason, like, I think like nothing for some reason, like when I say that my goal is for men and women to get along, that triggers feminists almost more than anything else that I say, more than any of my other takes. Like that one, for some reason, that phrase is like their trigger word where they go feral. I don't know what that is. Like something about that. Okay, I want to push this in a direction. So you said something and I want to kind of touch on it. We talk a lot about, especially on this side of the internet, the way that feminism harms men. And I think that's very obvious. But something that you talk about with a lot of insight is how feminism is actually harmful for women. And I think that needs more attention. So I want to give you some space to talk about that because that's interesting to me.
Well, I think the first thing really is that if you're a woman and you want to have a successful relationship with a man, you want to be married or just in a loving relationship, if you are looking at men as your oppressor or as the enemy, you're not going to have a very happy relationship. And that's really sad because, you know, women grow up wanting love, wanting romance, wanting, you know, a fairy tale, which doesn't really exist, as we know, but women want that. And women are the number one consumers of romance novels. And I write romance novels as well. I'm also an author, just for those who don't know. I write under my name Zarina Macha and under the name Diana Vale. And I think that if you're a woman and you want to actually be in a relationship with a man and you lead with this kind of feminist view, it's going to be very difficult. And also, I would say, oh God, I was just thinking about it now. Men tend to, so relationships where the woman earns more money than the man tend to be less successful than relationships where the man earns more money than the woman. And that's very, very difficult. So, yeah, I think, oh yes, of course, the victim mentality. So this idea of women seeing yourself as perpetual victims, that is very, very, very bad. So if you are a woman and you see yourself as a perpetual victim, then I think that is a horrible way to view yourself. And I think that that's just going to create a chip on your shoulder because, you know, I'm not anti-women. Like, I think a lot of people think if you're anti-feminist, you're anti-women. I'm not at all. I have a lot of love and respect for women as I do for men. I have some very good men and women in my life, including family members, friends. So, and I also host a space on Reddit called Women's Advocates, where we basically talk about pro-female stuff or women's issues, but from an anti-feminist perspective. And the idea is that I think that, and I'm sure there are a lot of women out there who are fed up with feminism, but who don't want to say I hate women. And I think women now are also a bit nervous because that's what happened to me when I was a teenager. Like, I heard all these women saying they were feminists and saying these very nasty things, and it makes you very uncomfortable because it's like, I don't want to be associated with that. Like, I wouldn't want to be affiliated with any feminists. You know, these are the same people, like, if you think of the academic feminists like Robin Morgan or Catherine McKinnon, Andrea Dworkin, Kate Millett, these were awful women. They were awful. And they would say things like, all heterosexual sex is rape, or all men are potential rapists, or you can't trust any man. They're just awful. So I don't want to be affiliated with that. And I don't think any sensible woman should. So yeah, I think that women need some kind of positive women's, I won't say movement, but women's space where we can talk about female stuff, but not be supporting the feminist rhetoric of you're a victim, men are the enemy, and you shouldn't be feminine. That's my view.
Yeah, that's the thing I run into the most is this is such an interesting rhetorical sleight of hand where feminists have gotten by gaining a monopoly on the conversation, because they'll say to be anti-feminist is to be anti-woman. And what I think what you're saying is, which is my position too. I'm so glad someone else is saying these things on this channel. It makes me happy. I'm so happy you're here. The idea that like actually like feminism is like really bad for women in terms of their life outcomes. It's like, hey, the way that you can self-actualize as a woman is to be just act like the worst man you can imagine. Be narcissistic, pompous, materialistic, no children, no investment in your community. Just make as much money as you can and spend it all on yourself. Just like act like the worst man you can imagine, and that's to be self-actualized as a woman, is terrible advice, by the way. Just horrible advice. Yeah. Or horrible advice. And most women who follow that will end up being very unhappy. And so I think critiquing that is not anti-woman. So that's a source of but because the rhetorical sleight of hand and the monopoly that feminism has on the zeitgeist, like you're in that position. And I think the other thing too is that when you speak, I'm a lot more careful about how I talk to women about these issues than I used to be. I used to come at it from a very logical perspective, and now I kind of just like listen and I just let them yell at me, and I'll like ask questions sometimes, but like I don't think it's like a logical thing, because I think it's like an emotional protective thing for a lot of women too. They're like they want to be safe, and I think critiquing feminism feels kind of unsafe. And they've also been kind of trained to be on the lookout for attacks from men. And let's be honest, there's a lot of men saying horrible things about women on the internet kind of all the time. And so if you're a woman and you see that, like your algorithm is trying to program you to hate men basically all the time. Like my niece is like 13 years old, and she's already seeing like videos that are designed to make her hate men, at 13. That and like skincare. Crazy amount of skin. Like the algorithm is like being evil to children. That's like a separate, kind of a separate problem. But yeah, it's tough, man. It's tough. Let's check in with the chat real quick, as I actually want to see. Let's see. Rogue Shirt says, I have a daughter. Do you have any advice to keep her from falling down the radical feminist rabbit hole? Yeah, I think a lot of parents are concerned about that right now, given that the educational system is presenting a very biased perspective on reality, and that a lot of people. Absolutely. Shout out to our channel. Also, if you've got links to your books, go ahead and shoot those to me in the over DMs, and I'll post them in the chat so that people can check out your books. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, how do we is there I don't know. I'm not a big fan of I don't think you can insulate children from information. I think that results in them being unprepared when they encounter it. I think you can inoculate them with better information. One thing that I've noticed is that you don't meet a lot of enthusiastic feminists who have great relationships with their dads, because a lot of feminism is just fuck you, dad. A lot of far leftist politics is just fuck you, dad. Basically, like that's what they're really saying, is like they hate anything that looks like authority or restriction. And so they're like, and sometimes it actually is like a personal relationship issue. And because, a lot of women, they reason about the world very personally. So it's like, so if you try to tell a woman who has a great dad, all men are bad, she's going to like, nuh-uh, I see a good man right there. You can't tell me all
I have a very good relationship with my parents, both my dad and my mom. I also have a very good relationship with my brother. I have 2 siblings, brother and sister. And yeah, I'm very lucky I have a good relationship with my family. There are people in my family who do support things I don't agree with, like feminism, which I'm not going to say, obviously, out them. But yeah, there are people in my family who do support feminism or wokeism, but we still maintain good relationships regardless, because I think family is more important than ideology. But yeah, I'm very concerned about the future of the younger generation, because they're being bombarded with this far leftist rhetoric. And I actually think that's where YouTube and the internet in general can actually be very positive, because I don't think I would have come out of feminism if it hadn't been for the internet, because I interacted with other people. I was also consuming a lot of content. Like there was this YouTuber I was obsessed with as a teenager called The Amazing Atheist.
Yeah.
And yeah, big guy, very controversial guy. But I really commend him for actually helping me to come out of being pro-feminism, because he really used a lot of logic. I know he's very outlandish and whatever, but he used a lot of logic to really process the absurdity and ludicrousness of feminism. And that actually helped me a lot, because he would use such good arguments. And then when I actually started to think about it, I realized I actually don't agree with this at all. And then because I've read a lot of books, like I've read feminist books, like I've read The Female Eunuch, I've read The Feminine Mystique, Sexual Politics, and then I've read Who Saw Feminism, The Myth of Male Power. I read a lot. So the more, I think reading helps. And I actually have a long list of books on Goodreads, which I would say is a fantastic list of books to read if you want to understand feminism. But it can be hard to find this stuff. Yeah, and most of them say the same thing. They give a lot of good stats. They basically talk about how there's this really bad spread of information of men effectively being the oppressor and women being oppressed. And one does have to ask as well, if women were so oppressed, how on earth was feminism so successful? Because feminism, like, how on earth can a movement become so successful and so pervasive in culture, in political institutions, in the media, if that group are being oppressed? It's completely illogical. I would say feminism, honestly, I would say it's a very evil ideology. I don't support any of it at all. I don't think I've benefited from it. And especially as well, feminism historically was not for women of color. It was not for working class women or lower class women. And it's really just a very elitist movement. And now we have intersectional feminism, which is very, very messed up because it's saying now that gender is a social construct and this idea that the white male is completely evil. There's no support for black men at all, what black men have historically had to go through. And I think that's just awful. So yeah, no, I think feminism is awful. For me, it's very, very obvious how awful feminism is. And the more I talk to people like yourself, the more I just come to see feminism is just such a terrible, terrible thing. I can't see why any sane, logical person.
No, she's frozen. Chat, she's frozen. Hold on. Wait. Go. Don't go. Wait, hold on. She's coming back. She's back. You're back. Okay.
Okay, I froze. That's terrible.
That's okay. That happens. That happens. It's part of the deal with the internet. No, you were really cooking though. I will say, so if you're, it's tough because like I said, like you're saying, feminism has become so ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And it's like, it's everybody. And it like informs a lot of the default, presuppositions of our society. Like we have an assumed, oh no, there she goes again. Guys, chat. All right, what do you guys think so far, by the way? This is pretty cool, right? This is pretty cool. Shout out to the 4%. Yeah, shout out to the 4%, which, by the way, for the last 28 days has been the 0%, by the way. My audience is growing, which is great. No women, though. Shout out to, hey, what's up? You're back.
Should I take my mic out? Do you think that might be affecting the freezing? Or
I don't think so. It's probably either it's probably your Wi-Fi connection being a little persnickety. It happens sometimes. Are you using an Ethernet cord?
I use a VPN.
Guys, that's fine. The VPN is fine, but if you use an Ethernet, you should probably if you're gonna do more live streams, because I know you host live streams on your channel. By the way, shout out to Rosh's YouTube channel.
I haven't gone off on it. Oh, thank you. I haven't had any of my live stream go off on my channel though.
Okay. All right.
So that's why I wonder if it could be the mic because I haven't used it. Yeah.
Could be. Anyway, in any event, let's talk about this on this channel. We do a lot of discourse on dating, which I didn't initially want to do. I was just going to do like a comedy show. And then I had a bunch of Zoomers be like, Theo, how do I talk to girls? And I was like, all right, I guess I could cover that if that's what you want to know, but like, I think one of the things that has happened, and I say this as also a single person. I'm, one of the millennials who hasn't figured it out yet. And one of the things that I've noticed is that the dating landscape has been just irreparably harmed by feminism. And some of that is promoting the idea of like promiscuity is empowering and like hookup culture. And you can have sex with sex is a handshake, just like a fun thing to do between friends and everything's really cool. And unfortunately, I think for a lot of people, the downstream of that is that it causes problems with people trying to form stable, lasting, satisfying, long-term relationships. And so I know that's something that you've made videos about in the past. So if you want to speak to that.
No, absolutely. And I can really relate to that without delving too much into my personal life. Yes, I think sexual promiscuity is such a big part of the culture now. And I do live in London, which is a cosmopolitan city. And I think that a lot of women now, it's very easy to engage in that kind of lifestyle. And I will say, if I'm being very honest, it's very, very unhealthy. It's not good for you long term. It's not a good idea, but it's just such a, like, I remember thinking to myself, for honestly, from a woman's perspective, sex is easy, love is hard, and actual real love requires a lot more effort, whereas sex just is nothing. So that is quite sad, and that does make me quite sad. And I think that because also a lot of women who critique feminism maybe haven't really engaged in that, but like coming from someone in that kind of with experience in that, I feel like I can give a better insight rather than saying, oh, women who do that are just terrible. Because actually, I think the reason why women engage in excessive promiscuity is because the culture kind of rewards it, because if you do that, you get women saying, oh, good for you, well done. And B, it's just because a lot of men now don't actually want long-term commitment, which is very sad. And I think a lot of men now, because I think I mentioned earlier the idea of female sexual power, women are the ones who control sex. And in the past, sex usually meant marriage. So a man had to marry a woman to get sex, which I think makes women the more, not powerful sex, but I think makes women the more kind of, I can't remember the word was, but like more in charge, in the sense that like women have more power because women control sex. And now, because women now just have sex so quickly with men they barely know, I think that has made it very hard for women to get real relationships. And it's very difficult because as a woman, you start thinking to yourself, oh, well, what am I supposed to do? I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, I think modern dating is a disaster, really. And I think that it's so hard because if you are able to secure a stable relationship, it usually doesn't last. It usually falls to pieces. And yeah, no, it's a big mess. And I think it's a mess for men and women. I think we're going to see a lot of people ending up unmarried, not having children. And it does make me quite sad. It makes me sad, but I've also kind of accepted it in myself. And I think that, I don't know what's going to happen, but I think it's one thing that does make me quite hopeful and positive is conversations like this, that more people are kind of starting to think about this very seriously and actually are speaking out against this. And I've seen some women on YouTube like Kate Ann Mitchell. She's a psychologist, and she's done some very good videos on this, and she's very, very, very good, very calm, none of that horrible like rhetoric that a lot of these red pill women have, or red pill men. But yeah, I think that dating now is just so exhausting. And okay, I just saw someone leave an interesting comment.
Yeah, hold on, let's pull that up, Roguish Nerd. I'm curious about your take as a woman. Is there pressure to attempt to use sex in order to secure a relationship? Yeah, I think so. Is there pressure? I think, okay, so this is from my perspective, just as someone who also, at one point in my life, I was hookup culture's most active, enthusiastic participant. Now, very against. So looking at it just from a game theory perspective, I think if I'm a woman, I got to think, okay, let's say I'm on a date with a guy that I like. If I withhold sex, there's a really good chance there's some other woman that likes him that he's just going to go somewhere else. So I'm thinking in terms of like, I have to offer him sex relatively quickly if I'm going to hold his attention. Right. So, but then the problem is now I've, lost a key piece of leverage in terms of, securing commitment. And so that kind of is a catch-22 for the woman, where she's like in a really tough situation where she's like, hey, I've got this guy I like, how do I, and like you're saying in historically, the answer was you guys get married. That's how it happens.
Yeah,
right? That's
absolutely. Yeah, I can relate to that. I think that also the problem is women now think that you have to have sex with a guy quite quickly, and I think that that's what's generally expected. And sex doesn't lead to, you're not going to get a relationship just by having sex with somebody, as most people know with common sense. Usually speaking, if you're with a guy, you like the guy, you sleep with them, a lot of the times it doesn't lead to a committed relationship. It just leads to a one-night stand. And I think the women end up becoming very cynical and quite jaded. They start thinking, oh, men are just looking for sex. And I'm not going to be, I'm going to be very blunt. A lot of men are just looking for sex now. And I think that's because women actually decided to just say, let's just have sex. And it doesn't mean anything because of liberal feminism. And liberal feminism, the sexual revolution, Helen Gurley Brown was a big figurehead in pioneering the sexual revolution and spearheading this. And I think that it's very sad because, even I have no idea how, like, long-term relationships work. I mean, I feel like I'm completely clueless. And I think that's also, there's a bit of my own personal resentment because I feel like I've grown up in a culture which has made it very difficult to actually have relationships. And in a city, if you live in a big city as well, most people don't really want commitment. You can go out with so many people. Like as a female, you might go out with so many men and not even sleep with them, just go out with them. And sometimes it's just like, oh, it's just one off because of dating apps now. And I mean, yeah, I think modern dating is a big mess. And a lot of people, they're not thinking about getting married. They're not thinking about commitment. And most women, especially once you start hitting 30, I mean, I'm in my late 20s, you start thinking about marriage or about whatever else, stability. And that's quite difficult. So yeah, I don't know what the solution is to that. I honestly couldn't tell you, but I can say very honestly that I think there was some goodness in how it used to be, in the sense of like people would, date and then get married and then have sex. And I know now someone might say it's a bit extreme now. I think, I don't think we have to go back to that necessarily, but at least sex meaning some kind of commitment, as opposed to just you have sex and that's it. You just never see each other again, or just become something casual. And I used to be very pro casual sex. I was kind of styling myself as like a sex positive anti-feminist, but there's a bit of an oxymoron in that, I guess, because feminism is very pro sex positivity. But then it depends, because also radical feminism in its kind of more logical extreme is actually very against heterosexual sex between men and women in general. So there's that. But yeah, I think that this idea of like, short-term sexual gratification doesn't do women any good at all. It's very difficult. And sometimes as a woman, you don't really, you kind of think to yourself, why weren't more people? Because the problem as well is, if you're a woman, you want to do that, other women will usually just encourage you. Mostly they'll just say, oh, it's fine, you can go for it, you can have fun. Like, you have to listen to what society says. And that's how women talk to each other. That's how we women talk to each other. We just encourage each other. If we don't privately agree, we'll just say, yeah, it's fine. Because even if we know it's not fine, we will say that because we don't want to look like we're being, shaming or anything. And yeah, I don't know. It's very difficult. And obviously, yeah, promiscuity. I mean, I don't think men should be promiscuous either. But
Me
I do
either.
think
No, I agree.
Yeah, I don't think men should be promiscuous either. But I think promiscuity harms, based on pure statistical evidence, promiscuity harms women more because women are not made to be like that. And women who have sexual trauma are more likely to engage in promiscuity. You mentioned something about dads as well. I mean, I'm lucky I do have a good dad, but I do have sexual trauma from when I was 18, and not from a boyfriend. And yeah, I think that trauma can be very hard to overcome. And it's very difficult because if you have trauma of any kind, that starts to make it very difficult for you to form healthy relationships with other people.
Yeah.
And it can make you very wary and very distrustful of people. So yeah, I don't know. I think modern dating is a huge mess for both sexes, really.
Yeah, this is something I say a lot. I actually think the big pushback I get from my audience is I actually say women have it harder. And my argument for that is that men and women have two different problems, and the failure to recognize the other sex's problem is just a failure of cross-sex mind reading. So basically the problem with women is they have an abundance of sexual options and very, very, very few meaningful relationship options, and no real ability to differentiate between the two because men will just lie. So
Absolutely.
they're essentially floating on a raft in the ocean surrounded by salt water, but not a drop to drink. Right. And I think a lot of men, unless you are like, I do pretty well on dating apps. I understand that my experience is atypical. I don't use dating apps anymore, but when I was using them, I did fine. I didn't have a problem with that. But that experience is atypical. And the market's gotten more competitive now. Now all the dating apps have height filters. Like if I was on there today, I might not do as well. So it's ruthless. So most men are getting zero attention, and they think because women can get sex whenever they want or get sexual attention whenever they want, that women are doing better. And that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what women want. I think most women, most of the time, there are outliers, but most women, most of the time, want to form a meaningful relationship with a man that they love and respect. That's what they want. And I think, and actually, one thing I will say is the guys that are just like running through women on dating apps, I think those guys do just want sex. And even some of those guys do want relationships, but they're in this, these patterns of behavior are very difficult to break. It's like almost like an addictive pattern at a certain point. It's very hard to break that cycle. And this paradox of infinite choice or whatever. But I will say, speaking to a lot of men who are like 20 years old, more of them are talking about getting married, building families, having children, and having legacies, and building Christian households and stuff like that. So I think and a lot of the women, first of all, this is one thing. Almost every woman that I talk to now, a lot of these women are in nightlife, hanging around comedy clubs late at night. Okay, so it's not, so factor that in. There is a bias in the sample. Almost every woman I talk to, one has had a relationship that ended because of pornography use. Almost every single one that I talk to the woman, which is interesting. Two, almost all of the women that I talk to are looking for would like hookup culture to be less ubiquitous and would like to move towards a model where people form stable relationships. But they kind of just throw their hands up like, what are you going to do? It is what it is. And I'm like, no, wait, it doesn't have to be like this. Because what I'm hearing is there actually are a lot of men who want to form stable relationships. And there are obviously women would prefer to form stable relationships. So I think the desire is that you can't like socially program out that desire. That's innate. That's biological. That's necessary to continue the species, right? So the desire is there. I guess but I feel like we're so like the reasonable coalition, which is what I consider us to be, is like different occupants of just the reasonable people coalition who think men and women should get along, which is like a fucking controversial take now. Like, I don't know how to get a foothold in the propaganda war where that has like a stranglehold on the culture. Like I don't know how to win the argument on like hookup culture and like stuff like that.
Yeah, the whole three arms up in the air thing, I can definitely relate to that. I mean, I think for women, it's a very simple Occam's razor. Like, if you don't want to engage in hookup culture, just stop. And I think that women actually need to say, maybe we shouldn't be doing this anymore. And there are writers now, feminist writers like Louise Perry and Mary Harrington, who are talking about how feminism should actually push back against hookup culture. But unfortunately, those women are still blaming the patriarchy. They're not actually looking at like how women have massively contributed to this. And that's a big problem I have with feminism. It frames everything because women are innocent, women are victims. We're not. Women can be awful. Women can be very bad. Women can be very, very terrible, very catty, very psychologically manipulative, vindictive, all the things that we would associate with men, which I actually personally would associate more with women, but maybe that's just my experiences with other women as well. And I think that we have this horrible like dynamic now where men and women are so fed up with each other. I also think it's interesting how you said that a lot of young men you meet are looking to get married and have families, and a lot of the women that you've encountered, their relationship ended because of porn. And I think with pornography use as well, there are men now who are very against that. They talk about things like no FAP and not watching pornography and just avoiding it because it's very, very bad for men and semen retention, which is very interesting. So, because obviously, like, the thing is, I'm not a man, so I can't necessarily empathize with the male experience. I can obviously, be supportive, and I consider myself an ally to men's rights in general, but I don't know, like, when men say, oh, we have no luck on dating apps, I don't know what to say to that, because obviously I can't relate to that at all as a female. But also, there are men who say like how there are sexual images everywhere all the time being thrown at them constantly, and it's just too much. And that they talk about like going on OnlyFans, like not going on, but seeing women on OnlyFans or Instagram. And I think this is very messed up because I think women are the ones who overly sexualize themselves. And it's different if you're going to a club because you want to hook up with the guy, that's different. But if you're on social media or on the internet, like, I don't understand why women go out of their way to sexualize themselves and then get angry when men react based on their natural primal instincts. It's very, very ridiculous, so Mona Charen is this American writer who has a book called Sex Matters. And she mentioned something which really stuck in my head, this idea of feminine modesty and masculine honor. And she talks about how that really kept society stable for a long time.
Yes.
You know, women were modest and men were honorable. So it was this idea of, again, of this complementarian idea that women wouldn't dress so overly sexually and wouldn't be, you know, promiscuous, and men would honor women, you know, wouldn't take advantage of the women sexually, would be gentlemanly, would, you know, behave chivalrously. And I think it's a shame now that we don't really seem to have that anymore. Like, because, you know, when you think of, you know, a good man, you know, being a gentleman, saying, "Are you okay?" and "my lady," and gentleman behavior is very, very good now. And I can also, I understand perhaps as a man, I don't know if you sometimes feel nervous talking to women sometimes, if you think, is she a feminist or is she going to, you know, freak out at me or what's going to happen? But I would feel personally very, very anxious if I were a man. I'd be very, very scared because I'd be thinking like women are just going to yell at me. Like I wouldn't want to be a man at all, especially not in this society. Because I think, you know, it's very hard for a lot of men. I mean, I think it's hard for women as well. I don't think women have it harder or men have it harder, but I think that men in general are very because the culture is so like anti-male and anti any kind of masculinity. I wouldn't want to be a man personally.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I'm definitely a typical case. I seek out these conversations on purpose. I get yelled at kind of a lot. But I handle it well. I don't take it personally because she's not yelling at me a lot of times. If a feminist is yelling at me in a parking lot outside of a comedy club, like she has other problems. That's not really about me. That's like, she's not yelling at me. She's yelling at like her dad or the guy who left her or whatever. And I'm just like a stand-in for that. And I don't mind it. I don't take it personally. I also see a lot of these women that I talk to have been hurt. Like a lot of times they're yelling at me because the guy who hurt them isn't there to yell at. So I try to be sensitive to that. If you ask the chat, like my problem is like is giving way too many excuses to women when they behave badly, giving them way too many passes rather than being too critical.
Well, that's interesting you say that. Sorry to cut you, because I think men naturally give women too many free passes, because I have had very bad experiences with men and very bad experiences with females as well. And I do think that it's bizarre when people, for example, when feminists say, "Oh, you know, I've had all these terrible experiences with men, I don't want a partner," that makes me think, well, I've had bad experiences with women. Does that mean I shouldn't have any friends? So, any female friends? So, yeah, I think that's ridiculous. And I think that men can be a bit too accommodating of women in general and too accommodating of bad female behavior. And I see that a lot in like media, in film, television, fiction, even in day-to-day life. Like a lot of women are terrible to men and men just put up with it. And I wonder why. You know, why do you think that you deserve to be treated like that? Because it's like, if a man is bad to a woman, people will say you're abusive, you're misogynistic, you're terrible. But if a woman is bad to a man, it's somehow empowerment or it's justified. And I find that just awful. So, you know, because women can be very, very nasty, very catty, very, not all, of course not always, some women are very kind, but, you know, this bad, toxic feminine behavior that is so prevalent among females, I feel like it's not called out enough. And that's one of the other reasons why I can't be a feminist. And, you know, I've met women who have talked about this. Actually, I've met quite a few women say, yeah, you know, women can be awful to other women. There's this really female on female hatred, pettiness. Women are just, they curse at each other and stuff. So, and no, we're not allowed to talk about it because the feminists will say, oh, it's because of patriarchy. And feminists, they're the worst. They don't really, you know, talk about bad female behavior or female cruelty. And seeing as we talked about it briefly before the stream, I don't know if you want to talk about her, but Just Polly Things. She's a very good example of very nasty.
Oh no, she froze again.
Woman. Oh, sure.
Okay, chat, just to set this up, she's frozen right now, but just to set this up, she's met Just Pearly Things in person and she's been on her show. So I think she's going to talk about that right now, but she's frozen. Okay, you're back. Okay, so I set that up. So now they know. Go ahead. Talk about Pearly Things.
Yeah, so Pearl, she is a terrible person. She's very, very catty, very, very full of herself. She's a nasty lady. And because I was invited on her show in 2023, and I was there for about 2 hours, and I remember just sitting there trying to talk intelligently And there was me and there was Pearl, there was 2 other women, and I felt most comfortable talking to the man because I felt like he was the most calm, most logical. He was also like a bit older, he's like 40 or something, but I felt most comfortable talking to the man. And I felt like with the women, it's like when you have women in a room together, there's this automatic tension. And I don't really have any problems with the other 2 women that much, but with Pearl, she's very rude. She's very, very anti-women. She says awful things about women. She really puts women down a lot. And she's obsessed with this idea of female virginity, which is very, very ridiculous to me because I think, well, first of all, she's not even a virgin. She's not a traditional, Christian lady herself. So I don't know why she's talking about that. But yeah, she seems to go out of her way to frame everything as a story of women are terrible and modern women are rubbish. And now we just have these women putting down other women. And there's no kind of like organized effort to say, look, women can be terrible, but women can also be very good. Like women are very good with cooperation. Women are very good with empathy. Women are very agreeable. There are some very good women. And like, for example, Janice Fiamenko, she's a fantastic woman, or Cassie J, she's a great woman. I have a lot of admiration. I have a lot of female role models. Like I like the old Hollywood starlets like Rita Hayworth and Marilyn Monroe. I like Sylvia Plath. I like a lot of, well-known females. I find them very inspiring. But yeah, I think women have done very good things in the world, just as men have. I just think that feminism makes women so catty and vile, and there's no kind of respect for men. So yeah, I can't stand feminism. And I do have this, this subreddit, women's advocates, and I like the idea of being a women's advocate as opposed to a feminist because there is the men's rights thing going on, but I think there needs to be a female space which is non-feminist. So yeah, that's kind of where I would say, the whole idea of female advocacy without the feminism.
Yeah, I think that's right. One thing that we deal with, I'm kind of thinking out loud here, we deal with on the men's side of things is that we do not have a shared vision. So if you're a Christian, like I'm a Christian, so I believe that men and women both have a fallen human nature. And what that means is that we're made in the image of God. We're capable of incredible virtue, but we are also we have all these selfish human desires that cause us to sin or to behave badly or behave in ways that harm other people. Right. And men and women, every man and woman walking earth has both competing voices. They have this incredible capacity for virtue and an incredible capacity for evil. And there's both. I think one thing we deal with on the men's side of the internet is we don't have a lot of visions of aspirational masculinity that are rooted in virtue. And I actually also, in fact, we have the opposite. We have visions of aspirational masculinity that are really like not helpful and are giving young men a bunch of terrible messages. And that's one of the reasons I started the show. And I think we have the same thing with women where we talk about like, because Pearl, God bless her, every once in a while, look, I can't help it. Like when Pearl first burst onto the scene, like she definitely said some things that were like, oh God, thank God somebody's saying it. But after a while, it's just like, bro, is just everything women's fault. Like, and I think she's audience captured. I think she's just saying whatever is going to get attention. I don't think she has real beliefs. And like talking about, I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that women are capable of evil, and I really appreciate that. But what I would really like to see is people who are modeling feminine virtue get signal boosted. I don't mean virtue in terms of virginity. I mean virtue as a complete concept about like how to behave as a person in the world. Like I like this idea you're getting at of like male honor and women's modesty, as in I owe you a duty and you owe me a duty, so that when we're walking around together, we have a reasonable expectation that we're going to treat each other a certain way, because I owe you that and you owe me a reciprocal duty, and that's how we build a high trust society. You know that I'm going to act like a gentleman, and if I don't, there's going to be consequences, and there's like you can go to appeal to some authority and be like, hey, this guy's untoward, and then I'm going to get consequences from that, so that makes it easier for you to trust me. Because the reality is, like, male sexuality or female sexuality, male bad behavior, female bad behavior, whatever it is, like the nature of humans is that if they pursue vice instead of virtue, it can be bad for everybody. So if we have social systems in place where there's a reasonable expectation that I owe you virtuous behavior, you owe me virtuous behavior, then we can build a society where people trust each other. And then it's a lot easier to form stable partnerships, because then it's like, you know what? I know what to expect. The problem with this, like, anything goes morality that we're kind of doing now, where it's just like, hey, do whatever feels good, bro. I have no idea what your vision of that is. And you have no idea what my vision of that is. And you don't know if I'm just lying. Like, I could just be lying about everything, like that's,
Yeah,
so.
you touched on something very important as well. This idea that like there's consequences for men. I know you probably would say there should be consequences for women too, but I actually think there are more consequences for bad male behavior right now than female bad behavior. Like if a woman behaves badly, like if she's, say, abusive towards a man, if she's emotionally manipulative, no one's really calling her out because there's not a lot of people who would say she's in the wrong, which is very sad. So there's consequences for bad male behavior, but none for bad female behavior. And that makes me very sad. And I think we should all strive to behave. I mean, the idea of virtue, I mean, I'm not religious. I don't believe in God or anything. I've had a lot of very, very bad experiences with all that spirituality. So I'm just agnostic, secularist. But I think that the idea of virtue, if you think of the Stoicism, the ancient Greeks, for example, aspiring to virtue, reason, rationality, I think these are all very reasonable principles to live by. And the way I see it, they're universal, they're humanitarian. There's something that can be taught. And I think that these are very good principles to try to live by. And a lot of people don't behave with virtue. A lot of people behave horribly, male and female. I've been on the receiving end of terrible, terrible behaviors from both men and women. I'm not perfect either. I'm sure I've done not so good things with people, but it's very hard because people now are very self-centered, and people generally just want to do, as you said, what feels good, what feels okay for them, and the side of looking out for other people, it's really being lost. So I think that's quite sad.
Yeah, I would love to see more virtuous role models emerging for both men and women. Because one of the reasons I started the show was I wanted to offer a different message than a lot of the manosphere creators that are, obviously their channels are huge. My channel is very small, but I was like, if I have to do a show anyway, because I have to do something on the internet to promote my stand-up, so I might as well do a show where there's I try to offer good information to counter some of this bad information. Some of the advice from manosphere creators about just like how to move in the world and how to behave is just terrible. Just terrible. You're just going to get horrible life outcomes if you do that. And the information they're giving about women, it's based on their sample size for the women they deal with is is like sex workers in Miami. So if it's like every single woman you talk to is a sex worker in Miami and you're paying her to be on your show, you're going to think that all women want money because the women you deal with want money. That's, I don't think you can extrapolate that. I think the problem with that, a lot of the, for instance, the Red Pill podcasts that go viral, a lot of the clips are, they're trying to, they bring sex workers on and get them to say dumb things. And then young men watch this. Remember, a lot of young men, like half of them haven't approached a woman in their life, right? So this is most of their experience from women is coming through the phone. And I think there's a similar thing going on with women where they're getting a bunch of terrible advice from women on the internet about how to behave. And a lot of their experience with men, because a lot of them, they don't have positive male role models. A lot of these women, especially the women that are really drawn to feminism, they don't have positive male role models. They don't have positive relationships with men. They don't have a stable romantic relationship with a man. And so a lot of the information they're getting about men is coming from the phone. I spoke to a woman recently who had a breakup, and she was like, do you think he was a narcissist? And she's doing this deep dive on TikTok to try to diagnose this dude. And I'm like, bro, it doesn't matter. Y'all aren't dating anymore. Maybe he was just a dick. Who cares? Move on. This is not helpful. This is rumination. This is ruminating. It's not, helping you move on. And I think a lot of the advice that I've seen, my algorithm's fucked up. So I get some of the videos that are supposed to go to women a lot to my shit. So I see some of the advice that's going to women about men is just profoundly unhelpful. And I think the incentives, at least, because we do live in such a low trust society right now, especially the dating aspect, I think the incentives are for people to behave selfishly. And I actually think the only way out of that is that people have to just bottom up begin to behave virtuously. Like, I have made the choice to uphold my duty to behave honorably, regardless of whether the individual woman that I'm dealing with deserves it or not. And that's really hard, because I get a lot of times, obviously, if a woman's treating me like she's in a low trust environment and she's, you know, a participant in hookup culture, and I'm trying to behave virtuously, there's going to be immediately our wires are going to be crossed. Our behavior is not going to match up. And that's resulted in a lot of confusion and a lot of mistrust. And women have a really hard time taking it at face value. And it's like we're in a Mexican standoff where she's like, you know, it's horrible. The lack of trust, but like, that's how I advocate a bottom up approach, you know, where it's like, I think each individual person takes responsibility for their own behavior and they choose to behave in a virtuous manner, whether that, regardless of how the other person is going to treat them. And I think for women, especially, that's going to be tough, because a lot of the guys are going to be expecting, you know, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. Let's do this. And if she's like, nah, bro, I want to have a committed relationship. Like, I think that's going to mean a lot of rejection, right? That's just reality, you know, but
yeah, no, I think that's really good. I mean, if it's okay to wrap up shortly,
yeah, absolutely.
Very, very good discussion, but yeah, no, I think you summed it up well. I think that, I mean, I would like to see, I don't know if you like Jordan Peterson, but for me, he's a very good example of someone who came on and really talks very positive things. And for me, like, that's the natural good man that a lot of men and women do look up to. Like, I know my brother, for example, really admires Jordan Peterson. What I like about him is he's very, very balanced. He's very, very intellectual, and he comes across a very he talks common sense. But yeah, I don't know. I do think there's a bit of an absence of positive role models for both men and women, because there's so many grifters out there. And yeah, that kind of sucks, but I don't know. Hopefully, you know, these conversations and further things can help to change that. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, hey, I do want to wrap up, because I know you said you wanted to cut it after an hour and we're a little over time, but I really appreciate you coming out. I want to give you a chance to shout out your material, because I know you got books to sell, you got channels to follow. We got one more question in the chat. Let's see. Let me know if you have time for this. I had a question about the proliferation of smut books. Do you have any thoughts on how to combat that? Yeah. What are you thinking about the smut issue? Do you have any views on that?
That's funny, because I write romance books as Diana Vale, and they are smutty. So I'm not I think fiction is fiction. I think literature, I mean, I believe in freedom of artistic expression and creativity. So I'm not against that personally.
Gotcha. Okay. Very cool. Well, that's awesome. I would love to have you on again. There's so many more things I want to talk to you about. This is fantastic. I'm so glad that we got to hang out. Thank you for coming and hanging out with me. Yeah. One more time.
Me at The Rational Female. That's my channel. I'm available on Instagram and on Twitter, The Rational Female. And yeah, I'm an author. If you go to my channel, all my details are on there.
That's fantastic. All right, folks, make sure to go ahead and follow her. I put her information in the video description. Once again, my name is Theo Snodgrass, comedian and podcaster out of Las Vegas, Nevada. Follow me on all my social media as well. I'm live on my channel Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, 11 a.m. Pacific time. So make sure to come back and check me out again real soon. Now, please enjoy the intro to my other show, Theocracy, as the outro to this show. Thank you very much.